Well, joining me now is the geopolitical analyst and director of the Global Strategy Project, Marco Vicenzino. So, Marco, how fragile is this ceasefire between Ukrainian troops and the separatists at the moment? And is the Russian troops are sort of amassing on the border of the eastern Ukrainian front? Is that going to provoke them, do you think?
It's extremely fragile. The first ceasefire was signed in early September of 2014. It lasted for a bit, but there were many violations. Finally, there was an outbreak, full outbreak of hostilities again, and it took what was called, the first one was called Minsk I, the Minsk Protocol. It took a second signing, an updated and upgraded version of Minsk II, signed in February of 2015. So it shows you, and even even Minsk II, there's been many violations on both sides. And considering the fact that now the weather is warming up, both sides are preparing for the potential resumption of hostilities, once again, the weather is also playing a key factor. And there's many territories, yet pockets held by the Ukrainian government in the east of the country that the separatists want under their control.
How valid are the fears from various sort of international groups that if with this break in fighting at the moment, that Russian troops will essentially help the separatists gain ground and gain arms?
Russian troops, there won't be actual Russian troops there. Many times what happens is they won't wear any insignia. They'll technically claim that they're volunteers. They'll resign officially from the Russian army and then go fight. So technically they'll say they're volunteers. In reality, they are Russian soldiers with preparation, and very good preparation, if anything, professional soldiers. It's right now in the east of the country, the possibility and the potential, like I said, of a resumption of conflict is heavy. Russia is not only involved in eastern Ukraine, but you also have Western forces from the United States in the training of Ukrainian troops in the west of the country, supplying them, arming them also, but not directly involved in the fighting. So I would say the possibility of resumption is fairly high at the present time.
What role do you think that the West should be playing in this conflict at the moment? Should they be doing more to broker some kind of peace deal?
I think they've done an enormous job. Particularly, you have to give a lot of credit to the French and to the Germans. They're the ones who took the lead in both Minsk I and particularly in the second one, in Minsk II in February of 2015. They've been providing us, they know that there's only so much they can do, and they're trying their best, including personal visits, meetings. They had meetings with Putin himself. Recently, the American Secretary of State, John Kerry, was in Russia for direct meetings with Vladimir Putin, also once again to re-engage in a dialogue. There are enormous differences, but at least to re-engage in some form of dialogue, to try to prevent as much as possible a resumption in the hostilities. But yes, there are serious concerns about an outbreak once.
And the idea of Vladimir Putin classifying deaths of Russian soldiers in special missions as a state secret, what do you think the strategy is behind that? That's come out today.
Basically, it's a censorship law. Censorship law is to basically bar any public discussion of deaths of Russian soldiers or Russian citizens. What I mean by that specifically was that earlier this year, there was a former prime minister and an opponent of Vladimir Putin by the name of Boris Nemtsov. Nemtsov made it clear that he was in the process of publishing a list of Russians who had died in the conflict in eastern Ukraine. That was just in a few days after that he was assassinated. In early May of 2015, members of his group actually published a report, and it was a very damning report outlining the 220 soldiers. So this new piece of legislation is a way to prevent that from, whether it's a blogger, a researcher, or even family members of Russians who die there, to prevent them from speaking publicly. They can be subject to 8 years in prison.
If the violence in the region does flare up again to the point that we saw around a year or so ago, is there a risk that Russia will get further ostracized in the eyes of the West?
I mean, if there is a resumption of hostilities, full-scale resumption of hostilities beyond skirmishes and violations of the ceasefire, if that takes place, the sanctions will be increased, will be strengthened. They're already strong as it is, but it'll be further isolation and further alienation of Russia. And then plus the low price of oil doesn't particularly help the Russians at all.
And the role of NATO in all this as well. How are NATO playing a part in what's going on there?
I wouldn't say NATO is playing a specific direct role. I mean, certain member states of NATO are playing a role in the training of Ukrainian forces, and certain individual members of NATO, such as France and Germany, as individual sovereign states, or you could say members of the European Union, are playing a direct role in trying to build the bridges and prevent another outbreak of violence. But NATO as an organization, I'd say, is more engaged in strengthening its eastern flank, particularly with the Baltic states, because of you see a lot of incursions taking place, Russian naval, flight, and also ground at times troops. You see a lot of these incursions in the Baltic states and other parts of Northern Europe that is creating a lot of fear and concern in NATO. But once again, it's directly in building bridges between the two countries and trying in that process. It's diplomatic actions being taken by individual states that are members of the European Union and also members of NATO.
Marco Vicenzino, thank you very much indeed for that.